Formula One is experiencing its first major changes to Parc Fermé regulations since 2003, and they're about to transform how teams approach race weekends in the most dramatic way possible. For 23 years, once qualifying ended, your car setup was locked in stone. Rain or shine, you were committed to whatever gamble you'd made. But starting with the 2026 Australian Grand Prix on March 6th, that era is officially over. The FIA has introduced what they're calling the rain hazard rule, and it's already being called the biggest regulatory shake-up in Formula One history. When Météo France, the FIA's official meteorological service, predicts a 40% or higher chance of rain during a sprint or race, race director Rui Marquez can declare a rain hazard up to 2 hours before qualifying begins. And when that happens, teams get something they haven't had in over 2 decades: the ability to change their car setups between qualifying and the race. Let me put this in perspective. Since Parc Fermé was introduced in 2003, teams have been forced into impossible gambling situations every time rain threatened a race weekend. The most dramatic example came just last year at the 2025 British Grand Prix, when Max Verstappen and Red Bull made what Christian Horner called a bit of a gamble with the weather, expecting a dry race. They set up their car with very low downforce for dry conditions, but then the weather forecast changed overnight. Verstappen later explained the agony of that situation. "We didn't think it was going to be so wet today," he said. "The weather forecast overnight changed and it wasn't in our favour. And then when I woke up, it became even worse. And then you're locked in, you cannot change the car. It's what you committed to. And, then it's going to be difficult, but that's racing as well." That phrase, "you're locked in," has defined Formula One strategy for 23 years. Teams have been forced to make educated guesses about conditions that might be completely different by race day, leading to spectacular miscalculations and safety concerns that have only grown more serious as the cars have become faster and more sophisticated. The wet weather safety debate intensified after tragedies like Delano Van Hoff's fatal accident at Spa in 2023, highlighting how crucial proper setup flexibility can be in changing conditions. But there's something fascinating about how this new rule works. The 40% threshold isn't arbitrary. It creates an objective trigger that removes the ambiguity teams have struggled with for decades. No more arguments about whether rain is likely or possible. When Météo France says 40% or higher, teams know they'll have options. The timing is crucial too. The rain hazard must be declared no later than 2 hours before qualifying begins, and it remains in effect until the race ends. This gives teams a structured window to prepare, rather than the last-minute scrambles we've seen so often. For sprint weekends, the same 2-hour window applies before sprint qualifying, with the declaration covering both the sprint session and potentially the main race. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The exact list of components that can be modified under this new rule is contained in a confidential document called FIA F1DO C080, which only the teams themselves can access. According to motorsport.com, the affected areas mainly include ride heights and wing angles, measures that have no cost but can significantly improve safety. The secrecy adds an intriguing element, but the focus is clearly on allowing teams to make the fundamental setup changes needed to handle dramatically different weather conditions, including adjustments that work with Pirelli's intermediate and wet tyre compounds. This rule couldn't be coming at a more critical time. The 2026 season represents what Sky Sports' Martin Brundle has called the biggest changes ever in Formula One. 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton captured the complexity perfectly during pre-season testing in Bahrain. "It's ridiculously complex," he said. I sat in a meeting the other day and they're taking us through it. And it's like, you need a degree to fully understand it all. The 2026 cars are fundamentally different machines. They feature straight-line mode, active aerodynamics, completely new power units from manufacturers including Honda, Audi, and Ford joining the grid, and extensive flat floors that create unique challenges in wet conditions. Haas driver Oliver Bearman highlighted these concerns during testing. With the speeds that we can go to and the amount of power that we have, especially in the first part of the straight, it's a question mark, that's for sure. The aquaplaning risk is particularly serious with these new cars. The reasoning behind the rain hazard rule is that 2026 cars, when running in full high downforce mode, could generate so much vertical load that the floor might touch the track surface, dramatically increasing the risk of aquaplaning. With those extensive flat floors creating ground effect aerodynamics, there's a real concern about the floor starting to float on water while the wheels lose contact with the track. The safety implications go beyond just aquaplaning. The 2026 cars will feature new hazard lights designed to complement the traditional red rain light, acknowledging that visibility in wet conditions has become an even greater concern. Even the active aerodynamics system has been modified for wet weather safety. The front wing will remain open at 50% in rainy conditions to prevent aquaplaning, while the rear wing flaps stay in cornering mode. But this isn't just about rain. The FIA has also introduced a parallel heat hazard rule. If the official weather service predicts a heat index greater than 31 degrees Celsius during a sprint or race, a heat hazard can be declared 24 hours before the competition begins, presumably allowing similar setup flexibility for extreme heat conditions. The historical context makes this change even more significant. Parc Fermé was originally introduced to prevent teams from building what were called qualifying special cars. In the early 2000s, teams would mount engines with a life of only 300 kilometres specifically for qualifying, along with special brakes and other components that would be completely replaced for the race. The development war had become so extreme and expensive that the FIA needed to intervene. The cost savings have been substantial. Parc Fermé saves approximately £50 million annually, about £2 million per race, compared to the pre-2003 era when teams were spending around £5 million per weekend on these qualifying specials. Even with the 2026 cost cap increasing from $135 million to $215 million under the financial regulations, maintaining some version of Parc Fermé remains crucial for financial sustainability. What's particularly clever about the new rule is that it maintains the cost-saving benefits of Parc Fermé while addressing the safety concerns that have emerged as weather forecasting has become more sophisticated, but still imperfect. Teams will still be locked in for dry conditions, preventing a return to the qualifying special era, but they'll have the flexibility needed when Mother Nature throws a curveball. The implementation has been carefully planned. A wet weather test using mule cars from McLaren and Mercedes was conducted in Bahrain on an artificially wetted track surface to help teams understand how the new cars behave in wet conditions. This data will be crucial as teams prepare for the first opportunity to use the rain hazard rule. As we head toward the 2026 Australian Grand Prix, the current rain forecast for Melbourne sits at only 20%, so we might have to wait for another race to see the rain hazard rule in action. But when it does come into play, we'll be witnessing something truly unprecedented in modern Formula One. For the first time since Michael Schumacher was dominating in his first Ferrari championship years, teams will have the flexibility to adapt their cars to changing weather conditions after qualifying ends. It's a fundamental shift that acknowledges both the incredible sophistication of modern Formula One cars and the reality that weather remains one of the sport's greatest unpredictable elements. The rain hazard rule represents more than just a regulatory change. It's the FIA's recognition that in an era of increasingly complex cars and precise weather forecasting, the sport needed to evolve beyond the rigid constraints that have defined race weekend strategy for over 2 decades. Starting in 2026, when the clouds gather and rain threatens, teams will finally have options beyond hoping their weather gamble pays off. If this breakdown was helpful, please leave a like and subscribe and let us know in the comments section which other changes the FIA should bring to Formula One. I'll see you in the next one.